Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today I have a fun gameplay between me, Phil, Henning and Chris. I go first on my Urza Power Scepter list, and my starting hand consists of 2 islands, Mana Crypt, Grim Monolith, Ledger Shredder, Gitaxian Probe and Mystical Tutor. Second is Phil on his Abaddon Cascade list. His starting hand consists of a Gemstone Cavern, Scalding Tarn, City of Brass, Simian Spirit Guide, Rhystic Study, Bolas Citadel, and for his London Mulligan he put a Chrome Mox under his library. Third is Henning on his Jansen treasure list. His starting hand consists of Windswept Heath, Blood Crypt, Treasure Vault, Enlightened Tutor, Disciple of the Vault, Diabolic Intent, and Ranger Captain of Eos. Fourth is Chris on his Oskar discard list. His starting hand consists of Underground River, Chrome Mox, Mox Opal, Ghostly Pilferer, Ledger Shredder, March of Swirling Mists, and Frantic Search. Before we start with the game, I want to ask you to subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. I started this channel 6 months ago and we are already almost at 1k subscribers. Thank you guys for the support and now enjoy the game. Phil puts a gemstone into play, ditching a City of Brass as a pre-game action. I draw for turn, play Snow Covered Island, Mana Vault. I tap to cast a Ledger Shredder, and I follow that up with a Gitaxian Probe looking at Phil's hand. He reveals Simian Spirit Guide, Rhystic Study, Scalding Tarn, and Bolas Citadel. I then pass my turn. Phil draws for turn, plays and cracks the Scalding Tarn for an Underground Sea, exiles his Simian Spirit Guide, and casts a Rhystic Study. Henning draws for turn, he plays a Windswept Heath, and passes. Chris draws for turn, plays an Underground River, a Chrome Mox, and he pays for the Rhystic Study. He imprints a March of Swirling Mists. He then passes, I untap, roll for Crypt and lose, draw, play Snow Covered Island, tap 2 mana to cast a Grim Monolith, not paying for the Rhystic Study. In response, Henning fetches. I tap my Mana Crypt to cast a Spell's Guide. Again, not paying for the Rhystic Study. I then get to loot with Ledger Shredder. I move to combat and deal 2 damage to Phil. Phil untaps, pays 1 for a Mana Vault, and at the end of his turn, Henning casts an Enlightened Tutor to get a Mana Crypt. He draws the Mana Crypt, casts it, and pays for Rhystic Study. He then plays a Blood Crypt tapped. Chris untaps, draws a card, plays an Exotic Orchid, and taps his mana to cast a Ghostly Pilferer, paying for Rhystic Study. I move to my turn, untap, roll for Crypt and lose again, draw a card. I then very slowly cast Urza, paying for Rhystic Study. Urza resolves and I get a Construct, but also Chris gets to draw a card of Ghostly Pilferer. I then tap my Spell's Guide to cast a Tormod's Crypt, paying for Rhystic Study. I then get to connive again, and my bird gets even bigger. I tap my Mana Crypt slowly again, and my Construct, because there aren't any beaters in play, and I try to disturb the Malevolent Hermit as Benevolent Geist. Ghostly Pilferer triggers, Chris draws a card, and Phil responds with a red Elemental Blast. So my Hermit gets countered. Let's move to exile. I end my turn by playing an Urza Saga and move to combat, swinging at Phil again. Phil draws for turn and he suspends an Ancestral Vision. He then passes, Henning untaps, rolls for Crypt and loses, draws a card. He plays a Treasure Vault, taps his Blood Crypt to cast a Disciple of the Vault. He taps out to cast a Diabolic Intent, sacrificing his Disciple of the Vault. It's a second spell, so I get to connive again, making my bird even bigger. Chris untaps, draws for turn, he moves to combat, attacking Phil. He then plays a Ledger Shredder of his own. At the end of his turn, I cast a Mystical Tutor. I grab a Motherly Mixture and put it on the top of my library, and move to my turn. I untap, roll for Crypt and lose again, draw a card, Urza Saga triggers, and I play Inventor Sphere. I move to combat with my Construct and the bird, swinging at Phil again. pass my turn. He draws, plays a Luxury Suite, and taps 3 mana to cast Florian. He then passes. Henning untaps. He rolls for Crypt and loses. Draws for turn. He then taps 3 mana to play a Dockside. Wow. I really didn't see that coming. Just kidding. He gets a ton of tokens. Then uses his last lands and a few tokens to cast Ranger Captain of Eos. It's a second spell, so the Ledger Shredders trigger again. I discard a Force of Will and make my bird even bigger. Chris reacts to his trigger by casting a Empiric Tutor. The tutor resolves, he puts a card on top of his library and then draws it with Ledger Shredder and discards a Chains of Mephistopheles to make his bird even bigger. Now Henning tutors up an Esper Sentinel and of course he casts it. Chris goes to his turn, untaps, does not pay for Ghostly Pilferer, casts Jewel Lotus, not paying, sacrifices Jewel Lotus to cast his commander, and because that's his second spell, both Ledger Shredders trigger again. I discard a Gilded Drake to make my bird even bigger. Chris discards a Frantic Surge and makes his bird even bigger. He then plays a Watery Grave, tapped. He moves to combat and deals 3 damage to Henning. At the end of his turn, I activate my Urza Saga to create another construct. I also tap 4 mana to untap my Grim Monolith. I then move to my turn, untap, roll for Crypt, and lose again, draw, activate the Urza Saga one more time with a trigger on the stack. Sacrifice it and get a Gravedigger's Cage into play. I then pay 4 mana to activate my Inventor's Fair, tutoring a Imposter Mech into my hand. I immediately cast the Imposter Mech and I have it enter as a copy of Dockside Extortionist, of course. I don't pay for Esper Sentinel or Rhystic Study, but I create a ton of treasures, which I can tap for mana, and which also make my constructs huge. I then move to combat, swinging my constructs, and my Ledger Shredder. Henning loses 16 life, Phil also loses 6 life. I then pass my turn, Phil untaps, draws, and plays a island. He taps out, well, almost taps out, to cast Abaddon, the Despoiler. Chris gets to draw from the Ghostly Pilferer, finishes his turn by suspending a Profane Tutor, sacrifices the Ranger Captain to silence us. He then draws for turn. He taps 3 mana to cast a Cloudstone Curio, and he then casts his commander Jansen, Chaos Crafter. This triggers the Cloudstone Curio, and Henning is now able to present a loop in which he bounces the Dockside Extortionists, recasts it to bounce his commander, then bounces Dockside again, which makes infinite treasure tokens. He then casts a Heat Shimmer targeting Urza. He does that in order to have an outlet for infinite mana, which will allow him to win the game if it resolves. But I have a Spellskite in play, I activate it paying 2 life and redirect it to Spellskite. He now pivots into another strategy. He uses his commander Jansen to turn all his treasure tokens into 1/1 colorless construct artifact tokens. So he now has an army of 1/1 tokens that will win him the game in the next turn cycle if we can't get rid of Henning or his tokens. He then passes to Chris. Chris untaps, he draws a card, plays an Underground Sea, moves to combat with his Ledger Shredder attacking Henning, getting him down to 7 life. He then casts an Artificer's Intuition. Chris passes his turn, I untap, I lose my Mana Crypt again. I use 3 of my treasures to transmute Mother Mixture, and I grab a Cyclonic Rift. I immediately cast an overloaded Cyclonic Rift in order to get rid of Henning's token army. Now, of course, if this Cyclonic Rift resolves, I will definitely win the game because I can just overrun everyone before they can rebuild. Chris doesn't want this to resolve, so he casts a Fierce Guardianship. I respond by activating Urza, because that's my only out, my only option to protect the overloaded Cyclonic Rift. Sometimes you are lucky and you flip into the right card, and this time I flipped into a Pact of Negation. This triggers Ghostly Pilferer and Ledger Shredder. Now Chris responds with a Force of Negation, countering the Cyclonic Rift. I can't interact with Force of Negation, and unfortunately my Pact of Negation gets countered, but not before I get to connive again with my Ledger Shredder, which actually makes him big enough to deal with Henning with combat damage. I then move to combat, and I swing my Ledger Shredder at Henning, 1 construct at Chris and 2 constructs at Phil. Henning dies, of course, because he can't block the flying creature. Phil blocks with Abaddon, and one of my construct gets through, so he's down to 1 life. And Chris also goes down to 22. Now, Phil has to pay for his Mana Vault trigger, or he will die to it. Plays a Badlands, casts a Mox Diamond, pitching an Arid Mesa. He then suspends a Lotus Bloom. And finally, he casts a Soul Ring. At the end of Phil's turn, Chris casts a Winds of Rebuke, targeting my Grafdigger's Cage, because that's stopping him from doing stuff, but I redirect it to my Spellskite. We all mill 2 cards, and Chris moves on to his turn. He untaps, draws a card, and then he pays 2 mana to cast a Cabal Ritual. The ritual resolves, and he has 5 mana in his pool. He then uses the 5 mana to cast an Ad Nauseam. He's at 22 life, but that's enough for him to win the game. In response, I cast a Brainstorm, looking for free interaction that might still be on top of my library. It also lets Phil draw an extra card, which might be interaction. Unfortunately, I get nothing, but Phil casts a Demonic Consultation naming Pact of Negation. He casts the Pact of Negation and counters the Ad Nauseam. Chris passes his turn. I untap, lose my Mana Crypt trigger again, draw for turn. I then move to combat with my constructs and my bird. It's 4 huge beaters on the board. I also attack Phil with my Urza. That's almost 50 damage coming at Chris there. He could block, of course, but he's all out of options, so he decides not to and hands me the game. Alright, that was a rather interesting game. Henning almost caught me off guard there when he tried to combo off. I probably shouldn't have discarded all the interaction, and especially the Pithing Needle, but to be honest, I didn't even know what lines the deck plays and how to interact with it. Now I know, and luckily I still had the Spellskite in play to redirect Henning's Heat Shimmer. Also, Ledger Shredder really pulled some weight here, mostly as a beater though. The main issue of looting is that we have a low hand size with Urza, and we can't make use of most cards we draw into. This led me to pivot to a beatdown plan because I wasn't able to 2-drop combo piece and interaction. Beating Face is definitely a viable game plan if you can use Urza Saga to have 2 additional constructs. Also, copying a Dockside with Imposter Mech is just another incredible value plan for Urza. Not only do we get tons of Mox Sapphires, it also just buffs our constructs and makes them big enough to swing left and right and kill your opponents. And yeah, that's it. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, share the video with your friends, and of course, don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more content in the future. This is Eisenherz, and auf Wiedersehen.